started with the next session. So my name is Simons. I coordinate the Renewables campaign at Friends of the Earth, so it's just one of the sister campaigns of climate. And you know, as we know, with disasters and the impacts of climate change, one of the biggest issues for communities is what happens to your source of electricity, what happens to your source of communications, how do you stay in contact with each other, and how do you organise and keep each other safe and make sure that you get what you need in those moments. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that issue today, and what communities can do at the grassroots level to build resilience, but also power around those kind of community responses. So we've got some amazing speakers with us here today, so I'm just going to read out one of the bios. So we have Wendy here from Voices of the Valley. So Wendy Farmer is president of Voices of the Valley, a community advocacy group that formed during the 2014 Hazelwood mine fire. And Wendy is also a community organiser at Renewables alongside me, so we talk a lot. And Wendy's very strongly committed to renewable energy and particularly advocating for coal communities and regional communities that are going through this big energy transition. And then next to Wendy we have Mark Parnell from Totally Renewable Yackandandah, amazing local organisation a few years ago declared that they were the first community in the country that declared that they were going to be 100% renewables by 2022. I think that was their target. It'd be cool to hear an update on that. But yeah, really inspiring organisation and community in town, Yackandandah, that's doing a lot on renewable energy locally. And we're going to hear from Mark about how they do that and the secret sauce, so to speak. And then we also, I just need to get the right page here. We have Jade and Ambrose from Merri-bek Tech. So Jade and Ambrose launched Merri-bek Tech in 2023. Merri-bek Tech is building local web servicing across the local area in order to provide affordable alternatives to big tech while improving our resilience in the face of the climate crisis. Jade is in Merri-bek and cares about building better futures, local volunteer maker community in Brunswick, stewarding the workbench area, teaching hard, hand-tool woodworking, involved in ramp housing, a project experimenting with possible approaches to collective housing. So Jade is thinking about the tech side of things, that sort of tech sovereignty for communities. Before we start, I might just talk a little bit about some of my own experiences. So I'm originally from New South Wales, on the south coast, the town of Parnell. And so during the 2019-2020 summer bushfires, that region was pretty severely impacted by the massive wildfires that we all saw. So one of the communities that was really impacted was Lake Conjola. And when the fires went through, one of the things that happened was that the local power networks were affected. So some of the distribution network was damaged by the fires, and that actually shut off the sewerage for that whole community. And so you can see here that in these moments of extreme disasters, there are kind of these cascading impacts, where you're not only dealing with fires and trying to make yourself safe in those moments, but our systems can shut down because of the systems we rely on, just for clean water and sewerage can be shut down because of those impacts. And so that's why things like local renewable energy systems, making our energy system more resilient is so important to keeping communities safe. But I might start with Wendy just to talk a little bit about West Valley and your concept of smart resilience centres you've been advocating for.
Okay, so yes, I'm from the Latrobe Valley, so we lived through the 45-day mine fire Well, to start with, I wasn't an activist. I was a stay-at-home mum. I had public speaking. I didn't do any of that. I trusted the government. I trusted anybody with authority. That soon changed. Hazelwood Mine Fire, the messages went out for people that were within, 200, 300 metres from the mine that was on fire. Leave now. These are old people in units. There's lots and lots of units in Law, not far from the mine. Some of them saying the fire was nothing back fence. They got out onto the street with their simmer frames walking along the street. What? When I hear that, and it still breaks my heart to think that happened. That vulnerable people were just left basically to die. Some did. So Voices of the Valley sort of before, as that was happening, I wasn't aware of that, but we knew there was a 45-day fire, there was a fire. I would say to people, imagine standing around a campfire and that smoke really gets in your face. It's terrible. What do? You move. When you're living in a community like that, you don't move. You just keep breathing it. My daughter came down a week after the fire started and she said, this is terrible. And I'm like, it's not that bad. We'd become immune to what we were smelling. We weren't smelling it. Although we were tasting it, we got used to it. Everything tasted like the mine fire. So, Voices of the Valley was a real grassroots, people saying, let's do something. My daughter challenged me, she said, what are you going to do, Mum? What do you mean? What am I going to do? And I said, she suggested protest. We didn't really protest. We had 1,200 people on a weekend when a lot of people tried to leave town on weekends. They were angry. But the people that came and the people that inputted into it, as soon as they knew someone was doing something, they were desperate. How can I help? What can I do? One of the things was the Valley realised that when we have problems like this, we need to be prepared for them. But how can you be prepared when we're having disasters everywhere, but we don't know where they're going to be. We did a lot more work after that Hazelwood Mine Fire and actually held companies to account, which was beautiful to see in court. Then Malakuta happened. We knew the fire was there. We knew it was coming towards communities. Some chose to leave, some didn't. How many people remember the Malakuta fire? Okay. How many people remember that army coming in with a boat to actually help people get out? We had a climate emergency. We had climate refugees jumping on boats to get out. Who would thought that like that, But what Voices of the Valley then said, how can we make sure that there's communities? Because we know everybody won't leave. While you might ask people to leave, they won't leave. Their homes, their family, their animals, they won't leave. So how do you set up something that is actually a resilience centre? We're not allowed to call it quite that. But how do you prepare a community with the tools they need before emergencies happen when you don't know where the emergency is going to be? It's a big question. So Voices of the Valley actually started looking at what an emergency centre would look like. Who would need to be in the room? Not just the community, not just our local council. We had the AusNet, we had the telecommunications, we had the internet people, we had everybody. We had emergency services, we had lots of people around the table discussing how could we actually set up something that was a safer place than homes, but people are still close to homes. Emergency services knew where to find them. Most communities have a football club that's a little bit clearer, or they have a building that might be their library, it might be a school, it might be a kindergarten. We had seen through the Royal Commission into Bushfires, they recommended refuge centres that were basically getting there, the fire's coming, the fire goes out, and you But when homes are displaced, when you can't go home or you can't be there for, 2 days, what do? The other thing is what we saw with Malakuta. People had lots of food in their cupboards, in their freezers. They left. There was no power. Your firefighter that came into town couldn't buy beer in the pub because there was no cost. There was no beer. You just couldn't get it. And then you couldn't get petrol to get out. So it became this whole world where you had no communication. Your family somewhere else are hearing that these things are happening and rumours spread, yet you had nothing. But what we see at these times also is governments often saying it's okay, they're resilient, they've gone through something like this before. Unless you give them the tools to be resilient, they can't be resilient. We have to build communities with resilience. Give them resilience, give them the tools. We have assets for communities, and it actually gives the community a place of belonging. We could have moved our freezers with food. There was time, there was hours. People will say, I've got a child, I've got a youth, let's get that food out of the freezer, get the freezer over to the main area that we're going to be safe for. You can never 100% safe. And then put the food back in the freezer and let's share what we've got. So we can prepare for resilience with renewable energy. Renewable energy is a system. Okay? A resilient centre needs a system. It needs all those things in place. It needs communication. It needs energy. It needs to be able to cool older people or babies if it's really hot, or warm them up. I heard the last time we were talking about,
Give 30 seconds.
safe places, but we can do it, and we can do it with using renewable energy and the systems that we create. But we need to go to governments. We need to say, here's our problem, we have solutions. They have to be part of it. And we've seen some communities start doing it.
Amazing, thank you, Wendy. Yeah, very inspiring stories. Mark, we'd love to hear Yackandandah. How do you guys do it? What's the secret recipe?
Well, thanks, Pat. Secret sauce you're promising. Well, first of all, I'll say that I'm fairly new to the totally renewable Yackandandah committee. My wife and I moved from suburban Adelaide a year and a half ago, and we now live on 5 acres on the outskirts of Yackandandah, where we're busily turning some old cow paddocks back into what was there pre-colonisation. It's a creek-lined grassy woodland. That's our project. But one of the reasons that we moved to Yackandandah is because we knew that it was in many ways a poster child of rural communities that did things a bit differently, and when the institutions failed, they did things for themselves. And in fact, before we'd even contemplated moving there, we saw Yackandandah on back roads on the ABC, and they told the story of the local petrol station was going to close. And people quickly realised that if people had to go to, say, Wodonga, because we're talking northeast Victoria, if they had to go to Wodonga to buy their petrol, they'd probably get their groceries there, they'd probably take their kids to school there, they'd probably not do so much stuff locally. So the community said, well, this will never do. They bought they actually opened a company, they got the community to put in, $100 each for shares, and they basically created their own petrol station. Now they've got their own hardware store. Now they've got their own farm supply store. One of the local pubs looked like closing. I reckon they would have bought that as well. And so it was the local community refusing to lay down and think of England. They were going to do it for themselves. And one of the things they did was they realised that in terms of the climate crisis, that Victoria as a state was lagging behind other parts of the world. I mean, I was a parochial South Australian, and we were leading the planet in renewables for a very long time, but other places are now catching up. And we knew this organisation, Totally Renewable Yackandandah, or TRY for short, that they were kicking some goals. People were coming from other parts of the country and around the world to Yackandandah to find out, well, how is it that you guys have got 60% of houses with solar panels on the roof when the state average is only 30%? How come you've got 60% when even the sunshine state of Queensland or my old state of South Australia only has 50%? So they were already kicking goals. Now, I'll get into some of the reasons why, but I was not going to bore you with statistics in terms of all the projects and things TRY's done, but I'll run a couple of them past you. One is that we've managed to get solar panels and batteries on all of the key public buildings in town, and it's not that they're necessarily designated safe places if a bushfire is coming, but they are certainly facilities that the community will need in a recovery situation. So the community centre, the town hall, the CFA. The CFA was interesting. It took 2 years to convince the Country Fire Authority that having panels on the roof and a battery out the back was a good idea. 2 years, now it's de rigueur. Now they don't build a CFA station anymore without panels on the roof and a battery out the back. I mean, but these things took time. We've got not one, but now 2 community scale batteries. So people might have a battery in their carport, 10 kilowatt hour battery. These are shipping container sized batteries to service our community. We're putting the second one in the sports park at the moment. It should be commissioned in the next little while. There's also a couple of trailer mounted diesel generators. If all else fails, and you need to keep that community centre going, you need to keep the hall going, you need to keep other things going, trailer-mounted diesel generators for emergencies. So yes, fossil fuels, but in an emergency, I think people would rather, have light and power than not have anything. The community's got spawned its own retailer. I mean, we all talk about big electricity companies and how they rip us all off. Indigo Power. A retailer which came directly out of Totally Renewable Yackandandah. Their corporate policy, 50% of all profits straight back into the community. Just like the Yackandandah Community Development Company, 50% of all profits back into the community. I'm also, for my sins, the president of the Yackandandah Folk Festival. Our profits straight back into the community. So this is the community doing things for themselves. So what is it about Yackandandah that made this possible? Why are we so much different to the rest of Australia, the rest of Victoria? It's a really interesting question. That's not me popping, is it?
I don't think so. I think it's
Sure. Well, one of the things I did is, again, at risk of boring people with stats, is I had a look at the ABS. What did they say about our community that might answer some of this? It told us that the median age in our community, and when I say our community, 1,000 people in town, 1,000 people in the hinterland, 2,000 in total. That's what the ABS says for Yackandandah. Median age 50. The state median age is 38, so we are a bit older. 60% of people in Yackandandah have tertiary qualifications. 30% of those, or 30% bachelor's degree or higher, so it's an educated community. People who are still in the workforce, 50% are in the professional or managerial sort of category. The state average is 40%. So what does that tell us? We're a bit older, we're highly educated. The people who are working in responsible positions. So are we a fabulously wealthy community inundated with millionaires? No. The average income is the state average. It's not any richer than elsewhere, but what I will say is that probably there's a higher number of retirees who perhaps own their own homes, who don't need to cover rent or mortgages. And so yes, it possibly is better off than lots of other parts. And another thing which, I've really been impressed by this gathering is there's so much engagement with multicultural communities. Yackandandah is pretty Anglo. I think it was something like 70% of people were born in Australia. No, it was 80% born in Australia, and I think 70% had both parents born in Australia. So we haven't had to engage with communities that don't speak English, for example. So whether that makes it easier, I think there are challenges, obviously, in multicultural Australia that we don't have in Yackandandah. So maybe that helps explain a little bit. But I think the real key to success has been the fact that they decided that this was going to be a bottom-up rather than a top-down approach. So Totally Renewable Yackandandah spent its first 2 years doing nothing but talking to the community, asking people, what do you want? What do you want for yourself? What do you want for your community? And the sort of things people were saying were pretty obvious when you think about it. They wanted their electricity to be reliable. They wanted it to be affordable. They'd like it not to be stuffing up the planet. And at a community level, they were really nervous about the bushfire situation. We've come close 3 times in the last 15 years. Luckily, touch wood, we haven't had fires through Yackandandah itself, but they've come close. So they wanted that resilience. Hence this idea of, can we be islandable? Islandability is the word they use. Well, we're not going to disconnect from the rest of the world, but if we can make sure that when the single power line into our area goes down, we can still maintain essential services, keep the supermarkets got panels all over the roof, I think they've got a battery as well, and they're part of the community. We think we can keep going, even if the power gets cut. And I think that's a really great objective. But the fact that people have been talking before they were doing means that we haven't had any objections to the sort of things we're doing. You're not getting, who's going to oppose the idea of being more resilient after a natural disaster? Who's going to oppose that? No one is. So talk, get the community on side, and being a small country town, the people who are talking to you are your neighbours, they're people you know. And I think that's been a big part of the success as well.
Thanks, Dave. I think my microphone has tapped out, so I'm going to try it again. I'll use this one. That's much better. Such an interesting case study, and that sort of can-do attitude of the community. You're facing like a corporation like pulling resources out, like closing the petrol station. The community taking ownership and leadership is a really big theme that runs through both those case studies. So thank you so much. We're now going to shift tack a little bit to talk a bit more about tech and communications. And Jade, would love to hear your take on that technology side of things.
It's hard to follow pushing back on big corporations and hearing from tech. I think when I first became a programmer 20 or 30 years ago, and I was excited about all the so-punk vibes of being, a tinkerer and maker and hacker in the interesting space of tech. And now I'm embarrassed to be in front of you all, I think, at a Climate Adaptation Fair and say I'm from the tech industry, because at best, tech companies have been, kind of the worst kind of rapacious growth neoliberalism, and at worst, they are rapidly creating fascism. But that doesn't mean that tech's going to magically go away. If we imagine the future that we want in our local communities and in our groups, we want obviously to mitigate the worst effects of climate change. We want to adapt to the changes that are at this point already locked in, and we want to push back on injustice and the rise of fascism. And to do that, we have to take technology very seriously. So I guess I'm involved in this local group. We're in Merri-bek, just to pick some borders on a map. There's about 20 of us or so at the moment. And we're trying to tackle those problems in a few different ways. So, for starters, the first thing we say to people is, in your life and in your community groups and your projects, you're probably already using apps and websites and emails and things that are all powered by servers in the cloud. And the cloud is actually data centers, big buildings with cooling and power systems and rows of computers. And this industry is now emitting more carbon than the airline industry. So when we think about, we wouldn't power our local community group based on all flying around the world to see each other. We wouldn't also want to necessarily have this climate destroying tech powering either. So on that front, I think in the local community, we really can run servers on solar power in our communities. And that makes a huge difference for our climate emissions. On the adaptation front though, if we acknowledge that obviously the coming decades are going to see worsening and worsening crisis, even if we change oil ways at this point, we really have to think about how that's going to work. The internet did fundamentally start as a very resilient system. It's actually quite well designed under the hood to be distributed and to handle shocks. But on top of that, the corporate platforms that we built centralise everything. It doesn't have to be that way. So in Merri-bek Tech, we're looking at what does it look like to build little local serving infrastructure that serves local community groups and keeps working when the power goes out, which really does require a different way of looking at technology. It's almost much more, it's like the difference between permaculture and going to Woolies. Like, you really have to think about it very differently and maybe pull back from some of the technologies that we've gotten used to and use simpler ones like email and notice boards and things like that. And then finally, like, if we are working on projects where we want to build better worlds, we need to think about what that public square is, that digital public square is that we are participating in. It's probably become very apparent to people recently, obviously, with, you know, like Musk and Twitter giving Nazi salutes on stage, with Facebook, you know, getting on the Joe Rogan podcast and saying they need to be more masculine and have less of this diversity nonsense. So if we're going to reclaim our public square and do our communication in a way that is aligned with our values, then we need to find ways to practice local living democracy in the online space as well as offline space. So there are, the technical work of this is already being done. Every tech platform that you enjoy using online or don't enjoy using online someone's already built an alternative. There are hobbyist projects, open source projects that are all at this point quite mature and quite usable. We're just not using them. And the problem of rolling them out in a local community is not a tech. So it's like when we think about, say, rolling out an open source social network in a local neighbourhood, it's about postering, it's about running like introductory workshops to teach grandma how to use it. It's about running a good code of conduct to make sure it's not full of Nazis. It's about having a group of volunteer moderators to, you know, like actually do that work and create community. In fact, it's fundamentally no different to create a community in the real world, and it augments that in some positive ways. So I guess that's kind of the three areas that Merri-bek Tech is working in. It's almost not revolutionary in the tech space. We're not doing anything fancy, we're not rolling out AI, we're not rolling out blockchain. Like, we're just doing the stuff that's been sitting around for a long time, and we're just doing it at the local library.
Thanks, Jade. And yeah, even mentioning libraries, like a really important institution that's coming under ideological attack that is providing so many important local resources to people that are, you know, accessible for free. What I might do is like work backwards, just with a couple of little questions, just to tease out a bit more of each of the projects, and then we might have some time for a couple of audience questions. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about, like, you mentioned you're working in a local community on like these local tech projects. Like, what does that actually look like? Is there some case studies, you know, some examples you can give us?
Yeah, well, I feel like we have not really achieved a whole lot yet in Merri-bek Tech in terms of we are hosting mirrors of Wikipedia as an example of having it working with the power going out. And I think we've kind of set ourselves a 3-year mission where 3 years from when we made this mission, a year ago, so 2 years from now, we would have some working community software used by community groups at 3 locations in Merri-bek that would stay up and in communication for a 3-day power outage. And that's a tricky problem to solve. You know, it means if you imagine going to a library and there's a laptop and a little computer server and a hard drive all powered up on batteries that have been powered by the sun, it needs to then talk to the next library or neighbourhood house or community facility over some technology. And there are some good radio technologies that will send digital signals, but even the hobbyists have some great stuff. But there's interesting obstacles, there's bandwidth limitations, there's range limitations, it spills in the way, all that sort of stuff. So we don't have any very strong success stories yet from our project. There obviously are strong projects in the space that we're aware of.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a really interesting sort of like startup, so to speak. Yeah. Okay, great. And Mark, you know, like it's such a rich example with totally renewable Yackandandah. Thinking through, like, how have you connected with other communities that are maybe trying similar things or facing challenges in their community, and like, what's the kind of conversations and advice that you guys are having with other groups?
Yeah, well, like I said, we're on the sort of circuit in a way where people come to Yackandandah and they ask us, you know, what did you do, how did you do it, what was the order of service? What I didn't mention before is that what we do have is some really smart people on our committee. We've got people who are smart technology-wise, people who work in the electricity industry, they understand how it all works, they're great technically. We've got people who are really good communicators, like they're in the community, they've always been in the community, everyone knows them, they're great communicators. And we've got some people who are well practiced in that dark art of submission writing. And, anyone who's written a submission, writing, but we've had great success in getting money. Victorian government, I think, had a community batteries program. I think they also put money into the community resilience program. We've got money there. And when you're looking good, and when people think you're doing really well, because you are, you attract private money as well. And so we've had, wealthy individuals who've, I love what you're doing, here's some money, that's fantastic. I might just, if I can quickly, just in terms of, because I didn't mention communication before, because when the power goes out, bushfires come through, everything's down. Now, Jade will probably never talk to me again after I declare this, but what they decided they needed was some sort of fail-proof communication. Now, the aforementioned Mr. Musk, unfortunately, has one of the best products, which is these low Earth orbit satellites, which work really, really well. But I am sure that our committee, as one, would come to you if you could get the solution for us, where we didn't have to use Mr. Musk to be able to keep the phones going and the internet going in a post-emergency situation. Most of us are on, I think they call fixed wireless. So I've got a little panel sort of thing on the roof of my house, which points to a far distant hill. And it sort of cuts out and buffers more than I'd like to think. But we've resisted at home. We're not going to give Mr. Musk any of our money, even though it would help us a great deal. But we can't wait for this new technology to come along that's going to help us talk to each other, whether the power's connected or not.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's part of the frustration, isn't it? Is it because of the economic systems around us, we're relying on people who are, embracing fascism and so on. So how do you build these other sovereign or, community-owned, publicly owned systems so that we aren't in a situation where we're having to turn to kind of like these corporate fascists?
And can I just say very quickly and cheekily add that the technology to deal with Musk and Starlink was invented in the French Revolution. It is called the Delta.
Okay, cool. So 5 minutes. Okay. We might actually go to audience questions. We've got 5 minutes left. Does anyone here have any questions? So, okay, we've got 3 so far. So I might start with you, and then here you go.
Right now, my question is, I forget your name, from Merri-bek. Jade. Could you say the remark that you just said, because I completely missed it?
I was making a cheeky reference to guillotines.
Oh,
I guess, and maybe be more serious about it. So Musk and SpaceX have surrounded the Earth with satellites which we can use to provide internet access in rural communities, and that's really great. So from my point of view, these satellites are the product of humanity. We put them there, they're ours. At some point, there needs to come a reckoning where there isn't one person with this much money, and these things need to be nationalised. And that's through a community tech project. Facebook got so big it became the default public sphere. At that point, we should give them a pat on the back and nationalise it. So when it comes to local tech, I'm not saying that we should rebuild alternatives and not also tackle big tech, but when we do rebuild alternatives, we need to think about how we can make them not a for-profit infrastructure, but part of the commons infrastructure on which we wish to build the solidarity economy that we want our adapted communities to look like. So although I was saying that build team for the billionaires, that was the cheeky comment, and yes, I do honestly believe that we probably should build team us, and I'm happy to say that on stage, but also we need better solutions than that.
Yeah, thanks. And just to clarify, Friends of the Earth does not condone political violence, but we do encourage jokes on our panels. So I might go to you.
Yeah. Just curious with Yackandandah, what the split between government and private funding has been, like where the majority of funding has come from, and how many strings are attached to that in terms of like using Yackandandah as like an example, or how happy people are for it just to be community owned
is they are for a purpose, and you have to do what you said you would do with their money. None of it, to my knowledge, has come with strings attached that we must sing the praises of whichever government gave us the money. I don't think any of that is, I think it's just been the fact that this community has done stuff which other communities have been talking about but haven't managed to do, that actually it's like a snowball gathering momentum as well. The proportion between private and public money, I don't know. I do know that from the Folk Festival point of view, I think we gave Totally Renewable Yackandandah $40,000 from the proceeds of our last Folk Festival, which I might have mentioned that I was the president of the Folk Festival. The 21st, 22nd, 23rd of March, it sells out most years. It's $150 for a weekend ticket, there's camping available. Anyway, it's a really good event. And the point is that what I love about this new community is that people are doing it for themselves. And these community ventures, whether it's the petrol station or the Folk Festival or whatever, we're pouring money back into our community, and that's what keeps communities vibrant. What I am also very aware of is so much of the conversation here has been about social infrastructure and about people and caring for people. I'm sort of talking a bit more about stuff, like about batteries and panels and wires and things like that. But don't for 1 minute want you to think that I believe that's enough. You know, the social side of it, absolutely. You've got to get the connection between people as well, you know, regardless of how good your satellite internet service is.
Thank you. So one more question, and then we'll get
There's one here too.
It's kind of a deep technical thing. So I've seen some like sort of solar entrepreneurs talking about using like Wi-Fi adapters to make their own like sort of localized sort of internet. So like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth being cool for that. But when we have, you know, the NBN and like satellite systems, do you think that's a misuse of community energy? We're better spent using the internet tech as it is and just trying to work with those open source sort of apps and social networks, correct?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting space. I think, like, if we go back about 15 years ago, I recall there was a group called Northern Wireless that was trying to build mesh networks. So these are networks where point-to-point communication between hobbyists' computers would be an alternative to the internet. And in the meantime, the internet got very good. So it got very good. The internet works very well at many different channels, providing civilization as we know it keeps going. I don't think that sort of thing is the answer, because you'll notice in a lot of these solutions that come grassroots from tech industry hobbyists, they're highly individualist, and many of them have fundamentally a libertarian politics at their core. So we're following a bit of a hybrid model where we want that sort of go-getter nature, which I'm sure we also get in Yackandandah and Malakuta and other places. When there's a disaster, people like to do things, but we want that grounded in the context of community solidarity. So we're looking at having each site in Merri-bek, which is a small cluster of Raspberry Pis connected via mesh technologies, hosted by a small group of 2 or 3 stewards who have some autonomy to manage that as excited hobbyists the way that they want. But we are a federation of those, and we are a community group, and we do sort of all need to agree. So it's not like anyone can just jump in this network as a hobbyist and put whatever they want in there. We're saying we have some autonomy, but we need to form community, we need to agree, and we have the right to kind of kick you out of the network if your server is being used for the wrong thing. So that's kind of our middle ground approach, but fundamentally based on the same technologies.
Yeah, interesting, because that kind of institution building at the local level. Thanks. I think we have time for one more and then finishing comments from Wendy, maybe. Yeah.
Right. Is there issues that we have to work with the power companies so that we can be independent, like technical issues, and why can't we do this individually at our houses? Like what sort of things do we have to work through there?
Well, one of the rules we discovered, again before my time, was that certain stuff has to go through an electricity retailer.
Yes.
And so the question was, well, we don't want AGL or Origin, we don't want any of those. Why don't we set up our own retailer?
Why can't we use our own rules?
Well, so they basically set up, it's headquartered in Beechworth, which is sort of the next town down the road. So the idea of a community retailer was a necessary requirement to do, I don't know which technical bits we couldn't do. It might have been the community battery, I think had to go through a retailer. So set up your own retailer.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about, there's the bigger thing, can I swap that? There's a bigger thing on that too, and that is we have a retailer, but then we have that company that owns the power suppliers. The energy system has been set up with regulations that were set up for one company or two companies in areas to actually own and do what they want. It's time that actually regulations are changed through government that communities can own. There's many communities across Australia that should be islanded when the grid lines break and go down. Many. Yackandandah was one, they would lose energy. Loxford's one that I can just think of right now that lose it weekly. We need to change the system. Energy doesn't need to be baseload. It doesn't need to be regulated by these companies that actually say how we will put our energy in and out. We don't need nuclear. Nuclear is a baseload energy that puts us in the same situation we are in right now. Renewable energy gives us distributed energy. We can make it here, we can use it here. Homes can be empowered by it. Homeowners, each individual can make money from it. Communities can make money from it. And we can actually get it into social housing. You know, every home should be part of the power station of the future, not a baseload power. How can we do it? The way we can do it is together we become stronger, together we advocate. We have a problem, let's build the solution and make sure it happens. As I said, my community right now is finding this nuclear fantasy, brain fart, dream, whatever you want to call. We're coming up to an election. Let's make sure it's about the people and not the big companies. We do need companies, we do need private investment. We can't all do it by ourselves, let's not fool ourselves. But when we're looking at renewable energy, it's not one company wanting to do one spot, and if that, wind turbine has an accident and actually has to shut down, all the others keep working. Okay? That's what we need. We need it distributed, so when power goes down, we lose a green line, we lose whatever, we don't black out a state or we don't black out a community, because all of a sudden we won't even notice, our own homes will just go bing and we're back on power.
Thank you. I think it might be time to call it. I'm getting some polite nods from Vicky over there. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation, all your amazing questions. Enjoy the rest of your day.